Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Plus podcast. Very, very excited to have you join me for this particular episode because this is someone I've wanted to speak to for many years on the podcast and haven't managed to arrange it until now. This is Greg Jackson, who is the boss and the founder of Octopus Energy in the UK, one of the most remarkable energy companies. We've had Fiona Howarth from Octopus on the show a few other times, but Greg is the kind of the monster brain behind the whole thing. Amazing guy. He'll tell us a little bit about how the whole thing came about. But it's a fascinating discussion about the kind of the big energy picture, and he dispenses with a couple of, I think, potentially quite damaging myths about alternatives to using fossil fuels directly, specifically hydrogen. So if you're interested in the hydrogen debate, this is definitely worth listening to, about using hydrogen to heat homes. How sensible is that idea? I look forward to you hearing that, and I look forward to your responses to that. But he's a charming and delightful man, really, really wonderful to listen to. But just before we start with lovely Greg, please let me just mention briefly, in passing, our wonderful sponsor, My Energy, who I am very proud to say I use their products on a daily basis and have done for many years. And I'm really proud and grateful for them to sponsor the Fully Charged Plus podcast. I've said it many times, but I just want to quickly list the three products that they currently produce, but with a caveat that they are about to launch a lot more, and I'm not allowed to talk about them yet, but from what I've heard, not seen it, not experienced it directly, from what I've heard, amazing, really, really clever pieces of technology that once installed in your house, you kind of forget are there, but they are hugely beneficial and will become increasingly so with a more expensive, challenging energy environment that we all live in. You want to take any advantage you can of reducing the costs of your energy, and it is possible. And that's really what the Fully Charged show and Fully Charged Plus podcast are all about. So the Zappy charger, I've mentioned it many times, is basically it's a box that you put on the wall. You can charge your car with it. It can be outside or inside, doesn't matter. And you can choose to either, on a very basic level, charge your car 100% from solar panels on your roof if you have them. If you don't have them, it's still worth getting because it also has timers built into it, so you can plug your car in, but it won't charge until the most optimum time in terms of cleanliness and cost of the electricity. And then you can override all that and just make it fast, and it will charge your car as fast as your supply and your car will accept. So it can go up to 22 kilowatts. It can charge your car very fast if you've got the supply to present that. And really easy to use and really solid and reliable bit of kit. Now, what helps that is the Harvey, which is a tiny little box on the wall, which basically integrates all your devices into one system. It judges, it measures, and it knows where your electricity is coming from. Is it coming from solar? Is it coming from the grid? And it can adjust things, turn them off and on to do that. And that essentially is just the kind of base control center for a thing called the Harvey, which is in my hot water tank cupboard. Don't even see it. I don't see it sometimes, 1 year to the next. It's constantly busy. It's directing power to the most sensible place to put it, where depending on the energy supply. Really intelligent piece of kit. I do nothing. I don't have to fiddle about with it or worry about it or think. I forget it's there for the vast majority of the time. I forget that it's there. So that is a really, really useful piece of technology. So that is fantastic. My Energy are developing so many new things. Amazing company, growing very fast. Really worth checking that out. myenergy.com/products will take you to a very clear and precise explanation of what they have on offer. So big thanks to My Energy. And now on with the podcast. So I want to welcome onto the Fully Charged Plus podcast, Greg Jackson from Octopus Energy. This is going to rock your world. My Energy is putting the I back into British innovation. My Energy is putting the I back into inventing the future. My Energy is putting the I back into inspiring a nation.
recharging the world with green, smart energy. Charge your EV with your PV and more. Visit myenergy.com and help to spark the green revolution. MyEnergy, driving the charge to a greener future.
Greg, for a start, brilliant to talk to you finally on the Fully Charged Show podcast, because I really, every time I meet you, I then leave a trail of data as I walk away, because my brain has been overfilled with amazing information from you. I just think I just want to do a little bit of adoration. I am not worth, what you've achieved in such short time is mind-boggling. Can we just quickly go back to when Octopus started? Because it feels like 3 months ago. I know it wasn't, but you've made such a massive impact in such a short time. Can you kind of give a background to how it came about?
Thanks, Robert. I think I and a couple of other entrepreneurs previously ran a business that built technology platforms in large companies, and when we sold that business, we'd kind of worked with quite a lot of companies as they went through the digital revolution. And, we looked around for which sector globally was the biggest sector that had not yet been revolutionized by tech. And it turned out energy. It's like, first of all, it's always been dear to my heart. I joined Greenpeace when I was 16. And I used to be sickened when I heard companies blaming green taxes for high energy prices when it was obvious those companies had high prices, because they were using out-of-date technology and they weren't thinking about their customers. And then, this thing about high-priced energy. By the way, let's just acknowledge that right now, energy costs are unacceptable. They are, it's not, all these euphemisms like painful and tough. It's awful for so many people. And, even before this crisis, there were times when you saw energy prices far too high because companies were not focused on how do they drive down the cost of the system to bring people cheaper energy. And I think, in a way, actually, this crisis shows just how important that is. If we carried on as a nation building renewables, instead of stopping in 2013, 2014, we have saved £2.5 billion this year.
Right.
If we'd focused on accelerating renewables, we could have a system where today the price of electricity is still set by the price of gas. This is crazy. Yeah. Electricity from gas was more expensive even before the crisis. So, I guess for me, like the story of Octopus is really brought to the fore right now, which is we need an energy system that is built around driving costs down through renewables. The physics works. The economics kind of works, except there's quite a lot of regulatory stuff that skews the picture in the wrong direction. We're working hard to fix that. But I do think, if like with the vaccine, the world learned to take a 15-year process and do it in a year.
Yeah.
How do we learn from this crisis how to accelerate our move to renewables and drive the cost down quickly?
Yeah, because it's so easy for all of us to forget recent history. Because I forgot that there was a time when there was government support, for example, for insulating homes, and we do have one of the worst housing stocks in Europe in terms of insulation, in terms of energy efficiency, and that stopped because that was referred to by the then Prime Minister as green crap. You go, God, we could have done with a lot of green crap in the last 10 years.
It's interesting. We burn gas to make up for leaky homes. Yeah, that was bad enough when gas was cheap, but still destroying our planet.
Yeah.
Now you just realise how bonkers it is, and I guess for me, we're at the third nail in the coffin of fossil fuels. Right, the first nail was when we started building renewables because we had to tackle climate change. Yeah. Now, we barely made a scratch, but we did enough to create the second nail, which was renewables are cheaper.
Yeah.
Right. Now, there's a whole infrastructure we have built around the old fossil fuel infrastructure. We have to move on from that. All right. I'll talk about that in a sec if you like. But then the third nail is now you realize it's energy security.
Yeah.
Like, being beholden to fossil fuels has not served us well. And look, we've got this crisis now that's not only provided the leverage, but also the funding for what Russia are doing. And prior to this, look, I grew up in the 70s. We had fossil fuel crises in the 70s. We've had gas and petrol crises pretty much every decade since. We're now, unlike those times, we've got the solution in our hands, and it's a swift move to electrification of everything we can electrify and doing it with renewables.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I think it is the advantage of age, because I'm older than you. That I remember riding my bike past literally miles of static cars queuing to get into a garage where they could buy a gallon of in the early 70s. But that is that spurred a lot of innovation then that never really came to anything. But I mean, this time it does feel very different, because it's not just a shortage of fuel, which there essentially isn't. It's just very expensive. But it is that when we have a prime minister who, in the face of horrendous horror coming from Russia, and we have to say a lot of their supporters are Russian, and there's a lot of Russian money. That's me saying that. You don't have to agree with me. But we have accepted a lot of Russian money into our economy in a fairly questionable and dodgy way, which is another topic really. But he then runs to somewhere much better, Saudi Arabia, one of the most brutal medieval regimes, who just beheaded 82 people in public the day before he arrived. We're giving those people money. That's one of the strongest arguments I've managed to come up with that, in effect, crosses all political spectrums, because even people who might be against wind turbines and all this renewable energy nonsense, when you say we're sending billions of pounds of our money to another country to pay for our diesel and petrol and jet fuel or whatever, I'd quite like to stop that.
Yeah,
it's a radical move.
You mentioned that people not liking wind turbines. The amazing thing is,
well, yeah,
look, every survey shows 80-ish% of people are positively supportive of wind turbines onshore, right? But I think, a survey we commissioned found 87% of people said they would welcome wind turbines in their postcode district if they got cheap electricity and wind is blowing.
Yes.
Other surveys, Martin Lewis found that 9 out of 10 people who live near a wind turbine support wind turbines.
And that's really interesting, because he is not, you would not classify Martin Lewis as being one of those annoying greenies.
No, mine didn't. And interesting, Martin's done an amazing job of kind of really championing a particular view of consumer rights and about really getting bargains. And he didn't even frame the question in the context of it being cheaper, which it is. Right. So I think the amazing thing there is just, look, there was a brilliant tweet thread. I wish I could remember the person who'd done it, but basically he compared the popularity of wind turbines. It's more popular than the Queen, more popular than pizza. My own research is more popular, according to the Daily Mail, than sex. Right? The whole thing is, we're held back by this perception that no one else feels like we do, but we all feel it, right? We've all got. Maybe when wind turbines first started appearing, there were a few things wrong, right? Developers were determined to put them up and then just ride roughshod over communities rather than work with them and bring them real benefits like cheap electricity when it's windy. And instead, we saw kind of extra line on the bill, which meant you got that kind of green crap argument. That world's gone. And now we've got used to them. And which would you rather have, like, a gas power plant, an oil refinery, or, an elegant wind turbine that pretty much fits into the landscape? And we're not going to put them in the beauty spots where people don't want them.
No. I'd love some in the Cotswolds, but I know that I'm very unpopular when I say that around here. We could have loads here. Because one of my arguments is, and I'm not sure this is right, but you'd know that I grew up relatively near Didcot Power Station. Not that near, actually, but I was near the pylons. Because obviously, if you have a large centralised generating thing, you've got to send that power out. Well, what do you do that with? Massive, huge strings of pylons across absolute rural beauty spots, places where people travel to see the beautiful River Thames winding through the Oxfordshire country. Massive pylons right over it, which we're used to, and I think people have complained about them in the past, but that infrastructure is it's a big imposition on the image of rural Britain. And yet that is fine. I mean, but what I want to know is, will we still need loads of pylons and wires like that if we have more wind turbines? Maybe we do.
Yeah, we'll need some, but I mean, in the most sensitive areas, they can be put underground. By the way, it costs 10 times more, but that's fine if it's appropriate. I think what we really need to is have a grown-up conversation about an energy system, because, for example, I mentioned there that local communities should get electricity cheaper when it's windy.
If they've got
Similarly, if a community wants really cheap energy, they might have pylons, and if they want it to be more expensive, they might bury it. But at the moment, what we have is this kind of fudge of a system where we've got a single price for electricity on the wholesale market across the whole nation all the time. And it's like, imagine if you had sort of a single price for plane tickets or for train tickets.
Yeah.
Some trains and planes that are just like, they're so full they can't take off, and others will be empty. Yeah. And that's how our energy system is. And I think enabling sensible decisions about infrastructure and the benefits to communities of cheaper and much more secure, resilient power. And you can kind of choose where you want to be on that spectrum, depending on community preferences. That would be a more sensible place than we are today, where everything is down to these massive fudges, where we have a one-size-fits-all solution, in a world where one size really doesn't fill.
Yes, because I mean it is a thing that I was so. Because you all know this from working in the energy industry, but I think the general public don't. And it was only when I went to the National Grid Control Room the first time we went there many years ago, where I saw that line of consumption and generation, and it isn't straight. I don't know if I thought it was straight, but I assumed we make electricity in those big power stations and it goes on, and so I'd imagined it was like that. But it's so colossally not like that. And then when that was explained to me, that big spike in the evenings, which I still don't really understand. I'd have thought lots of factories working and lots of offices working would use more than people putting the kettle on when they get home and putting the tumble dryer on or whatever. But there is this huge spike in the evening, which, that's the one thing I've done right in my house, is remove myself from adding to that spike. I never use electricity because I've got batteries, so I'm privileged, but I never use electricity between 4:30 and 7 in the evening. I make that an absolute rock solid rule.
Yeah, and that's a bit like, look, if you're booking a train ticket,
don't go at the peak time.
It's like, the peak time is going to be expensive.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's a similar thing. The reason that electricity is expensive between 4 and 7 p.m. is that's the point at which factories and businesses are still operating.
Right, yeah.
And people are getting home from work. And so you've got the two sources of demand at the same time. And added to that, the things you're doing when you get home from work are often the most energy intensive. So, putting on the oven, as an example. Now, as we move into the world that you and I, are passionate about, for example, the electrification of people getting electric cars, which, by the way, is just happening, right? This isn't sort of, it need a campaign. It doesn't need a sort of government push, because electric cars are better, right? Yeah. And increasingly every year they're getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. It's just happening. And anybody who is kind of, not yet convinced, it's kind of, it's like my mum, when the iPhone first arrived, my mum used a relatively fruity set of language to describe the extent to which she thought a landline was good enough. Right. And yet today she sits there with an Android kind of, broadcasting her opinions to the world on Facebook, right? And I love her dearly, by the way. I use that as an example because everyone recognizes it.
Yes, yeah.
These are the kind of revolutions we're going through at the moment. We're going through a revolution with electric cars, and I think a lot of people now, obviously everyone who watches and listens to you knows it.
Yeah.
Basically, it's happening. We're about to do the same with electric heating. It turns out electric heat pumps, by the way, are better than gas boilers, just like electric cars are better than petrol cars. We electrify everything. Now, the more of this we do, the more that stuff about the way that we use energy matters. But, the great news is that today, for example, our grid is about 40% empty, right? On the whole, we're using about 60% of the capacity at a given time.
Right. That is. Can I just underline that, because that is a really interesting fact. That because there's so many people assume that it's running right at a critical edge, and if we have electric cars, we're going to blow it up.
No,
There's a bit of extra capacity.
Electric cars let us use that spare capacity because, look, people are happy to charge their car at 4 p.m. or 4 a.m. as long as it's got enough electricity in it for what they want to do the next day.
Yeah.
And in fact, actually, the average UK commute is 9 miles. An electric car battery might hold, say, 250 miles of range. So you can often go for days on end without charging. Now, of course, sometimes you'll have a change of pattern. Maybe you'll be going on a long journey, or you need to be ready to go to hospital because someone's having a baby, something like that. It's dead easy to override the basic settings. But the ability to shift an electric car's charging hour to hour, or even day to day, enables us to make dramatically better use of that spare capacity. And if we're doing that, it actually brings the cost of the system down for everyone, because we've got more electrons traveling over the same amount of copper. So the cost of the copper per electron is cheaper.
Right.
Now,
yes.
Of course, at some point we might need some more copper, but we'll be putting more copper in when we're fully utilising what we've already got. Now, that in some ways, people worry about, am I going to get charged surge pricing? And it's not about that. It's actually much more about what we'd call plunge pricing, giving people bargains to use electricity when the system's empty. And by the way, we should talk about this, but when renewables are highly abundant, when it's windy and sunny. And it's a bit like, again, I'll talk about my mum. My mum's a brilliant cook. And when she goes shopping, she mainly buys stuff with the yellow label. Because if she sees some mince and some chilies and a bit of broccoli, kind of all discounted to clear, she knows she can make a meal out of it.
Right.
I, on the other hand, I'm a very bad cook. So if I go to the supermarket to buy a particular product, I buy it. I don't deviate because some of the stuff is discounted. And so some people take advantage of the discounts. And what they do is they reduce food waste, make the system more efficient for the rest of us who don't do that.
Yeah.
They bring the cost down and they make the world better. And that's kind of what we're going to be seeing with electricity, which is people who shift consumption around will get bargains. And in doing so, they'll make the system cheaper for everyone. And so we don't have it's fascinating. We used to this world where, in order for one person to benefit, someone else has got to suffer.
Yeah.
But when you've got spare capacity and increasing with renewables, when you've got, zero marginal cost generation, we can actually enable everyone to benefit.
Yeah. I mean, do you see in the long term, I'll rephrase that. Is it technically possible for our grid to be separated, in a sense that, is it technically possible for an individual who really wants to support renewables to buy renewables and not be affected by the gas price? Do you know what I mean? Is it possible to separate those out? Because it's become such a poignant issue at the moment that the gas, I don't want to buy gas from anyone.
I get loads of emails from people saying, look, if Octopus sells renewables, how come your price has gone up? Because of gas. And the reality in the UK, in fact, in pretty much every country at the moment, is you have essentially a single grid price. And that we have to pay the same price whether we're buying renewable. In fact, we have to pay more for renewable because you have to pay for it to be certified. In fact, sometimes quite a lot more than we do for stuff that comes from fossil fuels, which is crazy. So I think we are very keen on what you might call kind of wholesale market reform. Change the way the wholesale market works so we can reflect to consumers the real cost of renewables and enable us. I think what that would do is really start driving more investment in renewables, move them faster, and enable that grown-up conversation I had earlier. Because, by the way, there are times when it's not windy and it's not sunny, and there ain't much renewables about, right? And at times like that, they're going to be expensive. But the converse is, there are times, last year, in quarter one of last year, as a nation, we spent £300 million turning off wind farms because they couldn't find customers for that electricity.
To use that, that is savage, isn't it?
And if you could given it away for free,
right,
or very cheap, just like Tesco do with the stuff with the yellow label, we'd have actually been able to make use of that electricity, and that would have meant we weren't using it at times when there was less renewables around. So this wholesale market reform is incredibly technical. Many people might find it tedious, but it's absolutely critical, I think, now. A couple of things that people may not know. The biggest current subsidy scheme for building renewables is something called CFD. The way CFD works is the generator agrees a price with the government, and if the market price is below that, the generator gets a subsidy. But if the market price is above it, the generator has to pay the difference back to the government. And this year, wind farms are going to be paying over £1 billion of subsidies back to bill payers, which, by the way, is good. That's how we see renewables are cheaper, right?
Yeah.
So there are lots of ways in which we're beginning to see that, but they're all hidden in the system. And the more we can reflect consumers, the better. So for us, I often think about this thought exercise. And by the way, I've never talked about this publicly, so this could go horribly wrong. But the thought exercise is, imagine if you had two grids, a grey grid and a green grid.
Yeah.
Right? And coming to your house, you had a grey wire and a green wire. And you could set your preference, right? You'd say, look, I only ever want green. If there's no green available, I literally don't get any power, right?
Yeah.
Well, not many people would take that, all right? But for example, you might, Robert, with your batteries and everything. Who knows, right?
Well, I might be able to do more, but there'd still be days when I go, I need a bit of grey.
What most people would do is you go, look, I'll tell you what, I'll take green until the price is, 15p per hour, and if it goes more than that, then top me up with grey.
Yeah.
Right. And there might even be some people, well, there'd be quite a lot of people who say, I don't really care about green. Just give me whichever is cheapest at any moment in time. Yeah. Right. And I think if you had those two wires to your house, you could make that really grown-up decision, right? By the way, and that's a bit like how we do shopping. I will typically buy free-range chickens. I want to buy happy chickens. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'd rather not buy chickens. I can't wait to have full-on meat substitutes. But for now, sometimes I'll buy chicken. I'd rather buy chickens that I thought had been happy. But if they don't have any of those available, and I've got to buy chicken, I'll buy the other ones, and I'll feel bad. All right. But basically, I know that my money is going into the happier chicken system. Yeah. All right. And I'll trust the labels and everything, and I hope that the supermarkets and the government, everyone else, kind of make sure that's genuine. But that's the kind of way we operate there. So you can think that you could do that with electricity. Now, but that requires two grids, which, some people think will be expensive. By the way, it might not be a lot more expensive than we have today because, frankly, there's so much spare capacity. But anyway, put that aside. You can actually then knit those two grids together physically and just have an accounting system dealing with what's going on with the electrons.
Yeah.
And if you did that...
because that's what I wanted to ask. I mean, when you're suggesting this, you're not actually suggesting that we literally have, a green wire and a grey wire into a house. It can be done digitally, electronically with software. Because presumably, when I've been at the National Grid control room, they know exactly which electron is coming from where and where it's going. That is accountable.
But I think that is completely doable. Now, that may or may not be the right system, but I think as we start thinking about wholesale market reform, that's the kind of thinking that needs to lead into it. Because what it then does is instead of us all, you'll read these articles, and depending upon the political leanings of the author, and not necessarily political, but a variety of leanings of the author, they'll tell you how the system can never work with renewables. Yeah. And others will tell you it can work with 100% renewables tomorrow. And there's nothing to let us kind of detangle the facts. There are just so many bits of data. But this kind of approach would let you detangle the facts. Yeah. And you'd be able to see for yourself what are the real implications of more and more renewables. And at that point, by the way, imagine back in that world, if you then do say, hey, look, build a small, elegant wind farm just outside our town, you'd immediately see the impact. And more people in that town will go, wow, I'm now getting a lot of green power very cheaply. Yeah. Through this kind of system. And what do you do then, by the way? The first thing you do when you're realizing that you're getting cheap power when it's windy, because you can see the wind turbine turning, you're getting cheap power. Think, if I had an electric car, I could be filling it very cheap right now. Yeah. Right? And if I had electric heating, it would be very cheap right now. And I think, we need to bring these connections so that people can make informed decisions rather than everything just being this blancmange, this grey blancmange that you don't really know what's happening.
Yeah, because I mean that's I still have the Agile Energy tariff app on the Octopus Agile Energy tap on my phone, which I now look at probably once a month. Because there was a time when I became completely obsessed because I was the Octopus Agile, wasn't it? The tariff for that, because it made sense for me, because you could really see this kind of constant rise and fall in wholesale price, and it did go. I mean, I only experienced it 2 or 3 times when it really went negative, and then you went, this is crazy, because I'm charging both my batteries in my house, 2 cars, the water heating, everything at that time, and I was receiving money for doing it, and that has really stopped since the energy crisis, since the massive spike in gas prices.
That's
right.
Be back.
But that system is so encouraging for people who maybe aren't interested or don't understand. But I've shown a few people that in my neighborhood, and they became completely obsessed with it instantly.
Yeah, it's interesting. Isn't it? And I'll get told by some people, again, largely depends on people's preconceptions. Right? Yeah. They say people don't want that, and I'm like, loads of people don't want that, and loads of people do, and the ones who want it can make the system better for everyone. Because those times when you were getting paid to fill your car and charge your batteries and heat your water. The alternative would have been that either literally grid just turns off green generation, and probably pays compensation to the generators, by the way, right?
Yes.
So it costs money,
which then goes on to the electricity bill for everyone. Yeah,
for everyone, right? Everyone ends up paying more, or you get something for free. In fact, get paid for it. And the interesting thing we saw that, and by the way, or grid pays. There are industrial users who'll soak that power up when it's negative. Not necessarily using it, by the way. Right? It's just part of the, they've got the ability to do so, and so they might as well. Now, I'd like to democratize that and share it with people.
Yes.
But who, by the way, use it usefully. And a great example is, when that happens, we see people who've got electric cars saying, look, I've already charged my car. So if you come and fill yours, I get paid and you get free power.
Right.
How cool is that? And you see those behaviors. And of course, that's not necessarily everything, but people really respond to price signals. Me and my mates, we probably spent a decade having curries on a Monday night because Captain Cormers in Clapham Junction did half-price curries on Mondays. All right, and so now curry is a Friday night meal, as we all know, but actually it turned out we respond to the price signal and change behavior. And I think... You've just demonstrated how that worked for you and for others. And obviously, the energy crisis actually has kind of swamped the specific formula behind Agile. It's kind of stood the test of time through the pandemic, prior to that, and post. I think the energy crisis has just meant that there's not enough variability in the price too high too often. But it'll be back. But the other thing is, and I think it's often missed. Agile. We did Agile Outgoing, which is for people who've got solar panels, and we pay them on a formula based on the real market price every half hour for their generation. And although Agile for customers who are taking from the grid has reflected the very high prices of the pandemic, of the crisis, Agile Outgoing has been paying people remarkably high prices for their solar power. And again, this is one of those interesting things. We never really thought about that possibility because no one expected the price of gas to at one point go up 20-fold and thus drive our electricity prices through the roof. But in doing so, actually, for customers who'd said, look, I'll take a market price for my solar power, they've done very well out of it.
Yeah. And I mean, because I'm wondering now, because, I don't know enough about how global energy markets work, but what is clear is there is some correlation between, for instance, Dieselgate with Volkswagen and the massive gas price rise, that it makes everyone, absolutely regardless of any opinion or experience, they go, oh, that is wrong. That a big company like Volkswagen lied and cheated for years and then lied that they were lying and then eventually got caught out and went, okay, we were lying, and now we've got the arguments about. This is what I've found really interesting about what happened recently is always when there's been a price increase or a shock bit of news about energy prices, it's always been because of renewables. That will, even if it's nothing to do with that, that's the party line. That's gone. No one's arguing that. They're saying, well, it is gas, and it is from Mr. Putin. And we don't buy Putin's gas, but other people do. All those, but it's definitely the focus of the price rise is gas. And I'm just wondering whether long term, if you think what Volkswagen have done, transition a massive, the second or if not first biggest car company in the world, are basically turning all their factories to produce electric cars by the million. Yeah. Will the same thing happen? I mean, do you think this is a pivotal moment to really push? It kind of feels like to push up, particularly this country, the UK, to have really more renewables. I mean, to really jump it up.
Yeah, so I think like there's about 5 thoughts you sparked there. So forgive me.
Sorry, yes.
And the first thing is on Dieselgate. There's an amazing Netflix series. Business, Dirty Money.
Dirty Money, isn't it? Yeah.
About businesses that have done bad things. And I've sat down with our management team to watch the Volkswagen one and a couple of others. Right. Because I think, you've got to be... first of all, I was shocked and sickened when I saw that, at some of the cynicism. Yeah. And by the way, I was also inspired by the guy from, I can't remember which state it was in the States, but the kind of public...
The one who cracked it, yes, who said this is not right. Yeah.
And worked out the pattern that said there is actual cheat software at work here.
Yeah.
But, you watch that because you want to make sure that your company never falls into the trap of looking the other way or, hitting a target at any cost. And I think, there's one there on Western Union as well. And I think it's Western Union. And there's one on a payday loans company. And they're shocking, all right?
Yeah.
And so I think really being honest with yourself about how do we make sure we're never like that is actually really important.
Yes.
And I think I've worked in large companies and seen how very quickly you feel you're doing the right thing when you're working in the company's interest because you believe the company's good and you're working with good people. Yeah. But that can end up doing very bad things. And so, anyway, I just wanted to highlight, I think, the importance of that and really learning from and making sure you're honest with yourselves and each other about those kind of problems.
Yes.
I think, though, in terms of the kind of the turning point, first of all, we saw the crisis coming as early as last summer, and
because you did. So I want to say this: you saw it. I didn't know. Yeah. So clearly, if you worked in the, you were aware that this was going to happen. This price rise was coming.
We started organising meetings with the government and with others, and frankly, I've got to say, regardless of politics, some of the meetings with ministers and others, they really had been taking it seriously. Now they face this really difficult thing. You're coming out of the pandemic, the public finances are shot. Like, what do you do? And I can totally see why that's difficult. But an interesting thing that happened very early on was, I remember sitting there with the most senior people and saying, look, this is a gas crisis. It's a fossil fuel crisis. And we all need to be really clear about that. And I've been impressed that they have, been absolutely clear throughout this, despite what I would imagine is a lot of lobbying pressure.
Yeah.
They've been clear that the long-term answer is moving away from gas. Right. And even in the short term, the issue is gas prices. And not really, acknowledging arguments from a few recalcitrants, this is somehow down to renewables. By the way, it is not down to renewables. There is no way this is down to renewables, all right? Yes. But they've been, I think they've been quite strong in that. Now, if you look at the energy security strategy here in the UK, the big story really is about electrification. Sort of, whether we agree with sort of big nuclear projects or not, that's about electrification.
Yeah.
Doubling down on offshore wind is electrification. And actually, the stuff about onshore wind, some of us, we may, I don't know, some people I know might be a bit disappointed that it wasn't kind of full steam ahead on onshore wind. But actually reopening the door to onshore wind through the pilots and stuff is going to be, that's a seismic shift in politics.
Yes.
Now, by the way, we always want more, but the reality is, I think electrifying everything is now the sort of acknowledged way forward. There's a couple of bits, by the way. You and I could talk about the bonkers idea that we might use hydrogen for heating. Like, it is absolutely, like, the physics of it, just the economics. It is a bonkers idea. And by the way, the quicker we accept that, the better, because we're in the middle of an energy crisis. And we're currently spending £22 billion renewing the gas mains throughout the country,
so that we can use hydrogen.
To carry hydrogen, which they will never do. Okay.
No.
And the reason I can say this so confidently is, look, Octopus, we sell, I don't know, a couple of billion euro gas. Oh yeah, sorry, it's another thought from the Dieselgate thing, by the way. So 15 months ago, I sat there and I said, look, we sell £1 billion euro gas. Obviously, at today's price, that could be 2 or 3. I don't know. I mean, it's a lot of gas. And I had a conscience crisis, which was like, should we be doing this?
Yeah.
But people need to heat their homes, and at the moment, they've got gas boilers. And so the question we asked ourselves, was how do we lead the move away from gas so we can heat our homes without it? And the two obvious answers, right? Hydrogen or electricity.
Yeah.
And there are two ways of making hydrogen, really. Green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen, you take natural gas, methane, you do a load of processes to it, and at the end of that, you've got some hydrogen. You've also got carbon dioxide. And so, in theory, you bury or somehow, lock up the carbon dioxide.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which no one's done yet, but anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then you pump the hydrogen to people's houses where they burn it in boilers.
Yeah.
Now, the industry that kind of proposed this kind of approach won't yet give us any cost estimates, right?
Right.
They say, oh, well, there's a lot more work to be done. But we're meant to be in some sort of climate crisis. We should be moving fast. The idea that we've got to do loads of fundamental research before we can even put a cost to something, while at the same time we're spending £22 billion of bill payers' money upgrading the network, seems to me wrong. But what we can say is the following. It's going to cost a lot more than gas, because you start with gas.
Yes.
And then you do a load of stuff to it.
Yeah.
So it's going to cost more than gas. The other thing we can say, by the way, is if you put hydrogen in people's houses, even if you upgrade the networks, you've then got to look at what's going on in the house. Every valve, every joint, gas fires, other appliances, all of that would need to be hydrogen safe or removed. This isn't a like-for-like replacement. So you've got a much more expensive fuel than gas and a complex price. So blue hydrogen doesn't sound like a goer to me. Oh, and by the way, there's a high risk of leaking natural gas in the process. Methane is the worst greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Anyway, the alternative way of making hydrogen, green hydrogen, is fantastic. Octopus makes green hydrogen.
Right.
But we don't do it for heating. And the simple reason is, if you're starting with green hydrogen requires starting with green electrons, so renewable electricity. And you then use that electricity to electrolyze, extract hydrogen from water, and then you pump the hydrogen to people's houses and burn it. Now, for every unit of electricity you generate, when you've carried out those processes, you might end up with about 0.4 units of heat at the end, because there's inefficiencies and a lot of process involved. So 1 unit of electricity to about, let's call it half a unit of heat.
Right.
Meanwhile, if you start with a heat pump, an electric heat pump, you take green electrons, you send them to someone's house, and for each electron at the house, you generate about for each unit of electricity at the house, you generate about 3 units of heat. So
exactly the opposite way round. Yeah.
Exactly the opposite way around, right?
Yeah.
So, there'll be a bit of line losses, a bit of losses on the electricity going through the grid. But broadly speaking, you're going to get, 6 times more heat for every unit of electricity if you use a heat pump than you will with green hydrogen.
Yeah.
Now, people say, well, what do you do about, when it's not windy and stuff? Well, if you've got a 6-fold increase in efficiency, you've got a lot of room to solve problems like that. And by the way, we've got answers to those questions. But the point really being, heat pumps are so much more efficient than hydrogen.
Right.
We are never going to end up in, it would be a crazy world to end up with hydrogen. And the reason I say this right now, and the reason I have to be kind of quite forthright on it, is that today, your energy bill contains components to pay to upgrade our network for hydrogen and to pay hydrogen trials that are basically pointless. And the sooner we admit it's pointless, the sooner we can get to a world where we're saving that money and using it to cut bills, to speed up renewables, to help adopt green, decarbonized heating with heat pumps.
Yeah.
So people have said, but Greg, you're biased. You've got this heat pump research center. You've just bought a heat pump company. I'm like, we did those things because we did the analysis, right? And now we've just got to lead the way.
Yeah, I love the fact that you only bought those companies because you're biased, as opposed to you bought them because there's a massive opportunity there to improve the way people heat their homes. And, sure, Octopus might make a profit out of it eventually, but I don't see that as a bias. I see that as a very sensible business, because that was one of the things I was going to ask about the heat pump business. But that is a fascinating aspect of those arguments and those discussions, which I'm for some reason party to a great deal of it on the social medias is, it's all right for you liberal elite with your renewables, but ordinary people are having to pay to support you. You go, now hang on a minute. I'm ordinary, and two, I am paying to support an energy system that I personally will never benefit from. I don't have any gas in my house at all. I only have electricity. So I'm paying to support other people to have basically what is the fossil fuel lobby's argument about hydrogen. I mean, why are they so keen on hydrogen? Because they can produce it, but that's a whole other discussion.
It's not a whole other, Rob. These are really important things, right? First of all, look, Octopus sells a lot of gas. We'd be a lot better off just sitting there and hopefully one day making a profit by selling that gas and letting other people choose whether you end up with hydrogen heating or whatever, right? That would be a more profitable approach. Secondly, everything we've invested in, costs us money that we may never get back. It's high risk stuff. The heat pump research and development, the heat pump training, the acquiring heat pump company, all that stuff. And by the way, everything we do in electric vehicles currently doesn't make a profit, right? No. But the reason we do it all is we've analysed where we think the world is going to go and where it needs to go, and we're trying to be at the vanguard of that. And I think that speaks to how do you avoid a Dieselgate situation? Well, part of it is you want to align your business interests with what is right, because if you align your business interests with what is right, then you don't end up with this tension of having to decide between your ethics and your business. Look, and of course it's idealistic, and we're not hippies, but the more we can align these things, the dramatically better a business we can build that's more robust in the future, without trying to hold back the change and without, we should talk about things like, why do the fossil fuel industry love hydrogen? Well, look, they've got pipes and tanks,
refineries,
and they've got massive reserves of methane, which they would like to make valuable in a future world. I understand all that. I totally understand it.
Yeah, I totally understand it. Yeah.
All right, but I think, first of all, they shouldn't stand their other assets. Their assets, they've got massive customer bases. They've got astonishing brands. They've got colossal balance sheets. They've got relationships with governments in every country. They've got engineers that, if you can do deep sea oil drilling, right, you can do everything we need for the renewable revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And the quicker companies recognize those assets, the real ones, that are aligned with a good future, I think that the better they'll serve their long-term interests of their stakeholders. But of course, typically managers are there for a relatively short period of time. They're not going to be, and then they're good people, but they're not going to be around always to see it right through, and therefore they make shorter-term decisions. And I don't criticize any individual for that.
No, absolutely not. No.
What the system creates. And so, how do you get onto that? Oh, yeah, because you're biased, Robert, because you're biased in favor of electric cars.
I am. It's terrible. I can't deny that. I definitely am. So I'm just going through my little list of questions. Here's one, because I do hear this a lot. Why can't we put solar panels on the roofs of big warehouses and not put them in fields in Dorset? I think that's a direct quote from Twitter. And you kind of read that and you go, I kind of agree with that. There are huge areas of rooftops that haven't got anything on them. And I know I've recently spoken to a couple of people who lease huge industrial buildings who would love to put solar on their roofs. And the two reasons are, one, the roof wasn't built to take the weight, which you kind of go, not sure about that, because I reckon a heavy snowfall is going to be heavier than a load of solar panels. They're not that heavy. But also that it's a complication in the way the leases work and the property owners work. But, I mean, because I have ground-mounted solar and rooftop solar at my house, and it is amazing, even on a really dull, overcast day today, how much I produce from that.
Yeah.
And it does work in Europe. And it's whether that, I mean, I'm sort of thinking of as well as the expansion of, onshore wind, is there a lot of room to expand our solar capacity, without covering every inch of farmland with solar panels? I guess that's the gist.
Yeah, no, we do work with businesses on putting solar panels on roofs at scale.
Right.
Look, there's a lot of merit to it because the building can be using the solar. I mean, a lot of homes have got solar panels, but there's no one home in the day to use that electricity.
Yes.
So it gets exported to the grid. We should talk about the economics of that in a sec. But with the business, typically the solar panels are going to be generating when the business is using electricity. So it is a really efficient thing to do. There are, kind of complexities with leases, and let's face it, one of the reasons that businesses can take 3 months to get a broadband connection is the out-of-date approach to leases in the UK. So it's it's not just solar. There's a whole load of bits in our world suffer for this. But the physics of that work quite well. It's got to be said, by the way, look, large-scale solar in fields is a tiny proportion of our land. It's often on land that sometimes it could be used for agriculture, often it couldn't. And increasingly, there are ways of mixing it. So, for example, quite high solar mounting that allows sheep to graze underneath, as an example. So, we'll keep working our way forward as a society. But honestly, the amount of solar on the ground is minuscule on a national level. And the benefit of ground mounted is it's cheap to maintain. It's a lot
cheap to install, cheap to maintain,
things like that. Yeah, and also you can point it in the right direction, so you can get maximum generation. So I think, to me, they don't need to compete.
Right. Yeah.
Both is good. Right.
Yes.
I should very quickly say one thing on the economics of solar, because people ask about this a lot.
Yeah.
If you've got solar panels on your roof, let's take pre-crisis numbers just because they're more familiar. But typically, you're paying maybe 17 pence a kilowatt hour for electricity. But if you sell the solar to the grid, you're only getting about 5 pence. And that looks like there's some sort of squeeze going on.
Yeah.
But the reality is, and it's back to the stuff we talked about earlier, which is the crazy way that we charge for access to the grid means that actually the moment that electricity hits the grid or the distribution network, it picks up all the transmission, distribution, charges, levies, everything. And that's why solar that is on your own roof that you're using gives you about a 3-fold financial benefit compared to the stuff you then sell to other people. And that's pre-crisis numbers. They'd be even more extreme at the moment.
Yeah. So, I mean, what it says is it's the expense, the investment expense of investing in a battery for your home, really, when I did it, kind of didn't make sense. It's only because I'm a nutter early adopter. But it's beginning, there's a friend of mine who's a statistician, really high-level statistician in Oxford, who made all these jokes at my expense that I'd have to live till I'm 127 to get a payback on my stuff. He said, I've reappraised that. You now have to live to your mid-90s, and I think soon you will pass. That whole picture has flipped around because of the massive rise in energy costs.
And I think the only challenge is people shouldn't make long-term decisions based on the current prices, because will normalize. I don't know where we'll get to, but it'll normalize. And actually, we're probably going to see grid prices coming down over the medium to long term because of more renewables and more electrification. And certainly that's our mission, right? The other thing, by the way, though, is, at our heat pump research centre, we've got this setup where we've got vehicle to grid. That's where the car battery discharges into the house or the grid at times when grid prices are high. And I think a lot of people, instead of getting a battery for your home,
they use the car.
The car will just do it, right? It's a big battery. And increasingly, as long as the software is built into the car, it will look after the battery. not damage the life of it, but it would kind of just optimize the way your house uses electricity. All this stuff sounds a bit sci-fi, the idea that, there's going to be this automatic optimization of whether the car is going, the battery is discharging into your house or into the grid. Solar panels could be going into your car, into your house, or into the grid. You could be drawing from the grid into your car, anyway, all that stuff.
Yeah.
All that optimization, the kind of tech that Octopus built, Kraken, that's what it's doing. So you don't need to think it just happens. And the interesting thing is, look, you and I are doing this real-time sort of video podcast now. Yeah. And in between you and me, there's an enormous number of things optimizing.
Oh, goodness. Hundreds of bits. Yeah.
Exactly. They're all compressing and decompressing and encrypting and storing and buffering. And yet, to you and me, this is just a natural call.
Yeah.
That's how electricity is going to be, which is all that clever stuff will be happening. But the system will be cheaper and better for everyone because of that optimization.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very upbeat topic to end on. Greg, all I can say is I really want to do this again because it's fascinating. Because I feel we barely touched the sides with what we were discussing. I mean, it's a fascinating thing. But the prospect of a decrease in the price, because I've kind of gone, oh, that's it. Electricity and gas has gone up incredibly. And you've got to remember that it's done that before and it does come back down. But it may not come down to as low as it was before. I guess there's all those aspects of it.
But the tech changes. We electrify everything.
Yeah.
And we get more renewables. And by the way, look, as soon as you've got proper market signals, we'll have interconnectors joining us to other countries.
Yeah.
There's a project, disclosure, I'm a very small investor in it, but to connect a solar farm in Morocco to the UK with a cable that would give us 5 or 6% of our electricity needs. Now, that's just one example.
Wow.
As we create this kind of new electricity system, we do face the prospect of costs coming down, not because we're coming out of the crisis, that'll happen anyway, but actually because the fundamental cost of electrification, of electricity, is cheaper than the fundamental cost of the system we have today.
Right.
And there's a guy called Amory Lovin, an American academic and energy expert, who says, the more of it we do, the easier and cheaper it will get. And he's right.
Yeah. Absolutely. Brilliant. On that note, let's leave it there. Please come back, Greg. Really, really good to talk to you. Thanks so much. Well, big thanks to Greg for giving us that time. You may be able to imagine running a company like that. He's quite busy. It took a bit of pre-arranging to get access to find time for him. But a really charming, amazing man. When he's shown us around his office and all the systems that they're running at Octopus headquarters, it is truly remarkable and amazing. That's all. Obviously, do the subscription. I do mention that. It's in my job description. Mention subscriptions. Mention Patreon. Patreon is a wonderful crowdfunding support system that helps keep this show on the road. This show would not be here now if it wasn't for Patreon. We're not entirely reliant on the money from Patreon, but my goodness, it helps. It's really critically important. And we're hugely grateful to our many thousands of Patreon supporters. It's what makes this show possible. Really, really important. And, the subscribe thing doesn't cost anyone any money. You can do it on if you are listening to this just as an audio, you can do it on your podcast app. You can do it on YouTube if you want to listen to this on YouTube, all those things. That really helps us. But also tell your mates about it. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your Uncle Joe. He might be interested. I'm never getting one of them electric cars. I want my diesel. Oh, my goodness, look how much the diesel is. Can I ask about one of them electric cars? Yeah, tell him to listen to the Fully Charged Plus podcast because he'll learn something. Every week we have amazing people on, and we've got a lot of people planned that we're going to be doing in the future. That's all. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.